Today is going to be my September reading wrap up, which is my longest one yet. I finished 8 books this month. Go me. My name is Taylor Rose, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about everything reading and writing. As a disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers. I will try not to spoil the ending of the books, but I will be discussing plot lines that I did or did not like. So if you are really sensitive to spoilers, I suggest you do not finish this video. But if you just want to hear my thoughts on what I read, keep listening. So the first book that I finished in September was Holy Terrors by Margaret Owen. It is the 3rd book in her Little Thieves series, which overall I enjoyed. I really liked Little Thieves. Little Thieves was extremely satisfying, great plot. It's a YA, so keep that in mind. I just felt so satisfied reading the book because everything, came together in just this great way. However, if you watch my previous video, you know that I didn't really like Painted Devils as much, and this is because the book ends with Vanya and Emmerich breaking up. I did not think it was very well done in that Vanya spends the entire book just kind of lamenting like, well, there's no way a criminal like me and this religious police officer can be together because we're just total opposites and everyone's going to look down on him and he doesn't deserve that, which that's totally valid. Those are totally valid thoughts that align with her character. But she never ever thinks positively about it. She has this negative viewpoint on their relationship the entire book, but then the entire book is also building up to them consummating their relationship for the first time. So it's like, you don't think you can be together and you're convinced the relationship has to end, but then she finally sleeps with Emmerich and then the next morning runs away while he's still asleep. It was just like, what? If she had thought towards the end, like, no, this is working out, like we can get through it, blah, 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 and then had something, twist the knife in her, like, oh no, I was right. Why would I ever think this would work? Blah, blah, blah. But instead, she just was like negative the whole time. Like, see, I was right to be negative. And it's like, I don't know. It was just really unsatisfying. So I kind of wanted to stop at Painted Devils, but Holy Terrors, which was published in April, finally came on Kindle Unlimited. So I was like, I guess I should read it. And I regret it. If I were going to suggest this series to anyone, I would say stop at Little Thieves. Don't keep reading. I hate to say it. Holy Terrors takes place 18-ish months after the events of Painted Devils. Vanya has left Emmerich. She strikes out on her own to kind of help marginalized people. So like young girls who have been tricked into prostitution, poor people who are being financially manipulated, etc. Using her store of rubies to help people out, basically. Through the first 2 books, Vanya worked as the Rotpenny, so the red penny, committing kind of like Robin Hood-esque crimes and leaving a red penny as her marker. But now someone is going around killing people and also leaving behind a red penny. So it's like a copycat killer, sort of. And she knows she's not the one doing it, but she gets captured by Emmerich and his colleagues while they try and investigate who is actually committing the murders. Obviously, they're on bad terms because they broke up a year and a half ago, unexpectedly, in a really bad way. So the first 2 books, you were consistently hit over the head with the fact that Vanya and Emmerich are meant to be on the asexual spectrum. So not completely asexual, but demisexuality does fall on that spectrum. So it's about how they are reluctant to engage physically with anyone, each other, etc., because of the lack of emotional connection. So I liked that journey on the first 2 books. I really related to their thought processes and what was going on in the story. But this book kind of just threw it all out the window. Almost immediately, it is revealed that in these 18 months, Vanya has had physical relationships with 4.5 men. I say a half. She hasn't gone all the way with the final guy, but they're working on it. And I was just kind of like, you spent 2 novels telling me how she wouldn't do something like this, and then immediately she goes and does stuff like this? I was just very confused. So basically, she says that she had 1 longer relationship and then the 4 short ones that didn't end very well. If she had had the 1 longer relationship and then the final 5th one that backfires immediately at the beginning of the book, that would have that would have been fine. That would have been a lot more consistent, I feel, with her expressed ideology through the first 2 books. But instead, she was getting a new guy every 2 months. Like, I don't know. And like, I don't have any issue with that specifically. I just felt like it was really out of line with her characterization. Emmerich has also moved on and is now engaged. This just felt like total character assassination. Vanya has to listen to Emmerich hooking up with his fiance multiple times through a wall. Like, they have attached bedrooms for plot reasons, and she has to listen to them get it on multiple times. And she still gets back with him. I would never. I would not. Nope. And B, you find out that the only reason Emmerich is engaged is because he wanted to investigate Vanya and prove her innocence. But because people thought he was like too close to the case, so he got engaged to kind of like throw them off and be like, no, I've totally moved on. I don't care about Vanya at all. And I'm supposed to find that romantic or something? I don't know. It absolutely ruined Emmerich's character for me. Like, what a dumb jerk. I don't know. I hated it. I really hated it. Other than the romance plot line, I did enjoy the story, how they're solving the mystery of like the copycat killer while also dealing with the royal family is basically like fighting for the throne. So how they solve this inheritance issue was really interesting. Through Margaret Owen's books, pretty much all of them that I've read, everything's spiraling downwards, and then the narrator reveals a secret that they've been keeping from the reader, and it solves all the problems in the book ends. So, of course, this book did that as well, but so far I think it was the most poorly executed. I was very confused as to what was going on. Even with the secret reveal, it was just so abstract. I personally could not get a handle on what was really going on, which made the ending feel very rushed and kind of convenient. In her previous books, like, I have bought it. It was like a good twist, and you see all these connections on how this built up that way. But this time, it just felt like there were a lot of moving pieces that she never really addressed. And then they show up at the end, like, look at all these moving pieces. And it just was like, I didn't even know these pieces were involved in the story. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean, here are the pieces? So I did give it a 3-star on Goodreads because I knew that I was probably being really biased in my rating for reasons that didn't actually affect the plot or the prose or anything. Take that as you will. If I were going to recommend this series to anyone, I would tell you to stop at Little Thieves when you're happy and satisfied, and don't continue because you're just going to be very unhappy. I wish Vanya and Emmerich hadn't gone back together. I can't see their relationship ending well in the future from everything that happens. The next book I read was Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. I borrowed this book on Libby while I was waiting to see if I would be approved for the arc for The Everlasting, and wanted to like get a feel for her writing style. This book was so good, guys, especially now that we are getting into fall. Perfect vibes, spooky, loved it. I finished it literally in one sitting. I started it as I got into bed and stayed up all night reading. Starling House takes place in a town called Eden, Kentucky, where a girl named Opal is raising her much younger brother because their mom died around 10 years before. So they're living in a motel. Life sucks. Basically, they're super poor. And Opal is hoping to get her brother into a private school to A, get him out of Eden, B, secure his future and make sure that like he's gonna have a leg up. He's never gonna suffer again. In the town, there is a house that has a really bad reputation, the Starling House. No one goes there. The guy who lives there is a super recluse. People think the house is evil, essentially. And Opal happens to pass this house on her way home from work. She has to walk home from her job at, I forget, I think it was like Tractor Supply, basically. And one day while she's walking, she just feels compelled to touch the gate, and it cuts her and starts sucking up her blood. And then she looks up and sees the man who lives in the house. And he basically is like, get out of here. So she runs away, but then she just keeps getting drawn back to the house. And the guy who lives there, Arthur, you find out basically has this like psychic connection to the house. So he allows Opal to start working there as a cleaner because the house is in like this horrible state of disrepair. So Opal's going to hang out there basically and clean things, fix things, etc. to make the house happy. Meanwhile, Arthur is going through his own shit, trying to stop something. You don't really know what it is at the beginning of the book. I loved this. I thought it was so not funny, but I was like amused as I was reading, and I was like really drawn in to the characters. So Opal, obviously having had to raise her baby brother from being like a teenager, she is really snarky, kind of hard-hearted. She's had to defend herself from a lot of scorn from the other residents of the town. So like her point of view, like her narration was just so, I found it really touching, like how you just really feel for her and everything that she's been through, like witnessing her mother's death, raising this baby, living in this motel, like she had to drop out of school, she works this dead-end job. And I really liked seeing her evolution from the beginning where she is trying to like lock down all her emotions, stay hard-hearted, solve everything basically. And then she's evolving into someone who's like more in touch with her feelings. Ugh, I loved it. So this book is written in first-person POV, but it does have chapters in third person following Arthur. And I felt like those chapters were few and far between. I wish there had been more, kind of getting more into his headspace, because you see a lot through Opal's eyes, how she sees Arthur, but you don't really see much from Arthur until all of a sudden he's like, I'm in love with this girl. That was surprising, but it wasn't bad enough for me to knock off a star. I did give this 5 stars because I had such a good experience reading it. I also really enjoyed the younger brother character. He was probably the most realistic depiction of a teenager I've seen in a long time. Usually, for some reason, they either feel like children or they feel like adults. And he really pinned the like kind of angsty, oppositional, defiant, like teenager vibe so well. Another kind of thing that's a little nitpicky is that the climax, they kind of build up the antagonist the entire story, and then at the climax the antagonist just kind of fell a little flat, but I think that's just me. After Starling House, I started listening to the audiobook for The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. So The Merciful Crow doesn't have higher ratings than Margaret Owen's other books on Goodreads. It has a 3.88 while the others have 4.3. like Little Thieves and the sequel to this book. So I was interested to see how that wound up. The audiobook's really short. It's only 12 hours and I listened to it on 3 times speed. So the world building in this was great. So this book is about a society where there's a caste system based off of birds, and each caste has a special ability tied to that bird. We are following Phi, who is a crow. So all of the castes kind of have levels. There's the normal people who have just like the basic gift, and then the witch who has a like superpowered version of the gift. So the crows don't have any gift. They can't do anything except for their witches, who can use the bones of the other castes to utilize their gift. So if they have a phoenix bone, they can use fire. If they have a sparrow bone, they can basically turn invisible, hide themselves, things like that. So the crows travel around in little tribes with a witch as their chief, and their job is to travel wherever a plague beacon is lit to remove the plague-stricken bodies from a town and then burn them on a pyre separate from civilization, because they are the only caste who is immune to this plague, the Sinner's Plague. So the book opens up with Phi's tribe going to the capital city, where apparently the crown prince has catched the plague and died. So they collect the bodies of, so her and her father collect the bodies of the prince and his bodyguard, take them out of the city, and then she finds out that they're actually alive. They smuggled living people out of the city who don't actually have the plague. And so the prince, Jasimir, reveals that the queen, Rusana, his stepmother, is planning to take over the throne by getting rid of him. And so he wants to be escorted across the country to his aunt, who is like high up in their military. And so the story is about Fi's tribe helping the prince get to safety with his bodyguard, Tavin. As for the audiobook side, I really enjoyed how Amy Landon was able to distinguish the different casts from each other through their accents. As for the story, some of the things that I really liked, the world building around the magic and the bones, super cool. I loved how everything made sense. There were rules. I'm definitely a fan of harder magic systems. Or Fi's personality as well, great. She's had a hard life, but the like emotional journey of trying to accept like her future as a chief while her father, the current chief, is aging and like trying to push her more into a leadership role. Really poignant. Loved that. The banter between Fi, Jasimir, and Tavin, so the prince and the bodyguard, super funny. They all had really distinct personalities, which I liked. There's also a cat side character. You know, I'm a sucker for cats. However, outside of that main group, the side characters kind of felt really flimsy. Like they just appear, make a joke, and disappear. You know what I mean? Like they didn't really feel like integral to the story, I guess. Another thing to note is that unlike her Little Thieves series, this one doesn't really have that much description about the world. And I think that's just kind of a symptom of the world not being that advanced, I guess. Like they sleep with furs, they travel on foot with a cart, that sort of thing. They just wear robes. I mean, I wish more of the world had been filled in via visual description. The plot itself is pretty basic. You know, it's a journey to destination story. And a lot of the like background plot building was specifically through their conversations. So they're talking about things happening, but you don't actually really see them happening. Because of this, I gave it 3 stars. It was good. I'm not obsessed with it. Definitely feels much more YA than her other series, Little Thieves. After that, I read A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. I've seen a lot of people talk about this on Book Talk, specifically about how they felt it idolized colonialism. And while I could see where they were coming from, I was expecting to be surprised with where the plot took me, but it was really like it totally made sense why that's where the plot went, to me at least. So this story is about a world where one kingdom has taken over multiple other kingdoms through like a decades-long war, and kind of like the heirs for each of those other countries is taken to the new like capital of the empire, where they were kind of like raised with the crown prince, now the king. And the king wants to establish his power by finding the source of all magic. So he sends essentially all of the heirs and then another character on a journey to find like the root of all magic. The main character is a woman named Lorelei Caskell. Her people are definitely like Jewish coded. They live in a ghetto in the city. They're not allowed to leave. They are really discriminated against. And so she is using this opportunity because if the journey is successful, she will become the king's advisor. And she sees that as a way to secure safety and stability for not only herself, but also her people in general. Of the other characters, one who plays the biggest role is Sylvia von Wolf. She's Lorelei's rival academically, because all these characters are going to university together. And they've had the same advisor. They've kind of been in all the same classes. They're like kind of at odds because Lorelei thinks Sylvia is just this like, she just thinks she's not very serious. She's too naive about like the monsters and magical creatures in their world. So right off the bat on their expedition, the advisor of Lorelai and Sylvia, who is leading the expedition, is murdered. So Lorelai, basically under threat of death, has to find out who murdered the advisor. And she knows that Sylvia couldn't have done it. So they kind of secretly team up against everyone else on the expedition to figure out who did it. So I had multiple issues with this book. On one hand, it was really beautifully written, great prose. Reading it felt nice. Lorelai as a POV character, I really enjoyed how bitter and kind of like sharp and demanding she was all the time. I just thought it was funny because usually the main character is trying to like also appeal to you, but she was just so bitter and rude. Like it was just, you know, kind of surprising. You know, it was fun to see the cast of characters and how they all bounced off each other. It was a really good look into how it feels when you're shoehorned into a group that has a long history together. Like you're the newbie, nobody knows you. It's really awkward. So like that feeling was super prescient in the story. The yearning also, Lorelai is obviously wildly in love with Sylvia, but she's in such denial. The whole book is just this like incredible yearning. I loved how that was expressed. But ultimately, the book kind of fell flat because I was confused at like half the time. None of the conversations really made sense. It felt like all the conversations ended before you got the information you were supposed to be getting. Like the endings were just chopped off all the conversations. So you're kind of like, what are they talking about? Or there's no context to the conversation. They just throw you in, but they're speaking vaguely about things. So it's like you don't know what they're talking about from context, and you also can't tell what they're talking about from their actual dialogue. It was just a really strange feeling. Another thing is that a lot of the descriptions were vague. So like while most all of them were very beautiful, but they didn't actually tell you much sometimes. So the world has these magical creatures that they call the Wildeloot and Wildeloite, I don't know. And you can tell that they are supposed to be actual folklore creatures from our world. And some of them have the same names, but some of them don't. And it was just especially confusing because the descriptions would be vague things like, it has fur, or its round face peered up at me. So I could never tell what it was supposed to look like. Like, is it a little humanoid creature? Is it like an animal? What? And so you kind of like, I would have to like sort through all my memories of folklore and kind of like try and match up behaviors to monsters I know to figure out what monster it was supposed to be, which wasn't great. Also, frequently, something would be mentioned once, and then every time after that, it would be referenced but not described. And a good example of this is that one character is wounded in a specific spot, but it doesn't seem to affect anything for like 20 pages. So they get wounded, they kind of brush it off. You forget about it because it's like 20 pages later. And then all of a sudden, another character's like, oh, we need to bind your wound. And then it just says like they took off their shirt and bound their wound. And it was like, what wound? Where is it? What does it look like? Is there even blood? Like, I'm getting zero. I'm getting zero from this scene. Very frustrating. And so I would have to like scroll back on my Kindle to when it was first mentioned. And then even then, it would just be like, oh, they were stabbed in the shoulder. Okay. I just didn't understand why things wouldn't be described again. It definitely gave off this kind of like white room feeling. I don't know. I was always having to go back and confirm things because the references were just so vague. There was also a lot of continuity issues. So obviously they're on this expedition through the wilderness. So they have packs and tents and bags and coats and yada, yada, yada. But things would just appear and disappear without any real consideration. So for example, they have to go free diving through this like cave system, basically. And they specifically on the shore take off their coats, dive in, swim through this narrow passage where they feel the rocks scraping them down both sides. They get into the cave with air, and then they take off their packs and set up tents. And so like I can understand maybe they felt the rock pull on the pack on their back, but then why wouldn't it say that? Like the packs hadn't been mentioned for pages and pages and pages and pages. And then all of a sudden they have them with furs and their tents and stuff to make a fire. And it was just like, there's no way you free dove with that amount of equipment strapped to your body. I didn't buy it at all. Or they would put down a pack and then never pick it up. Or they would pick up packs that they never put down, even though they've moved in between these scenes, like they've traveled. And also, I didn't really notice this with the side characters, but I felt like Sylvia's descriptions just were all over the place. She was described as tiny and light, but then she was also described as muscular and very dense and heavy. But then she was described as super thin. And then at one point, they have to ride in little boats together, and Lorelai wants to ride with someone else. So she's like, I can't ride with Sylvia. We'd capsize the boat. But then she gets in the boat with a tall man. And so it was like, you're telling me riding with Sylvia, the tiny and light, but muscular and dense woman, would capsize the boat, but you getting in the boat with this like 6 foot plus tall soldier wouldn't capsize the boat? When Lorelai's also described as being very tall? Bizarre. I don't know. The action scenes were pretty flimsy. Like the descriptions didn't actually tell me what was going on, or they would happen really quickly so there wasn't any tension, but then it was supposed to, but like you could tell from the aftermath that it was supposed to be this like huge deal that this just happened. Because of all of these things, it took me so long to read this book. I kept stopping because I was bored, and I'd put it down and then I'd come back and I'd have to reread so much because they're just kind of like constantly pseudo referencing things. And once I hit 60%, I was able to like sit there and finish it. But until then, it was extremely difficult to get through this. Back to the colonialism thing. I don't know why people are surprised because about the ending, because it was really, really clear what Lorelai's intentions were, and she never shifts from that. She does not change her mind at all. That is her end goal, and it's her end goal the whole book. Sylvia also was pretty clear. She went to war as a child, is super traumatized by it, and does not want to go back to war. So it's like, what is she going to pick, guys? Is she going to pick to go to war? Or is she going to pick to not go to war? She's going to do everything she can to not go back to war. Overall, pretty disappointing. I love the cover, which is why I read this after hearing people talk about it. Just frustrating. Ugh. So after that, I went with another dark academia and I read A Theory of Dreaming. So this is the sequel of A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. So I talked about A Study in Drowning in my previous wrap up, and everything people complained about for A Study in Drowning, I am complaining about for A Theory of Dreaming. Basically, this story picks up after the end of the first book. Effie and Preston are going back to school, but Effie is now a literature student and having to deal with all the repercussions of that because she's the only girl in the school. She's the first girl even allowed, but also there are like some political machinations going on behind the scenes that are making it even more difficult for her. Meanwhile, Preston is being pulled into some stuff by his advisor that he's interested in, but he also doesn't want to share with the advisor. Basically, Preston is starting to have these dreams of the churches under the water. He can hear the bells from the myth talked about in the first book. And so he's like being haunted by these visions and these sounds and stuff and trying to figure out what it is. I'm just kind of confused why this was even written how it was. Again, both of the books I was able to finish in one reading. I was immediately pulled in. I loved the prose, but ultimately the plot just fell really flat. So in the first book, people were upset that the racism against Preston wasn't really addressed. And in the first book covers like 2 weeks of their lives. So it's like, of course, they're not going to do anything really groundbreaking other than solve that one mystery, right? Like they can't solve discrimination from decades of this war. And so I was excited thinking like this book is finally going to address it. While it addresses it in that racism against Preston is an extremely strong thread, like he faces it a lot and has to deal with it, nothing ultimately comes of it. Like his whole thing is that like I'm a foreigner and I'm a civilian, like I'm poor. So he gets saved by a rich guy. Yeah. They discover something really important that would change everything, and then they don't tell anyone. They discover it and keep it a secret. And I'm like, this would literally change everything. What are you talking about? And I just felt like Preston and Effie both had scenes where they were confronted about something where they would have a very good argument against it in that conversation. And then they just don't say anything. They're just like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And it's like, excuse you? What do you mean? Like, you have absolutely zero retorts to that? Like, you have a novel full. It was very frustrating. So it just felt like the story didn't really cover anything. It was just them having dreams and half dealing with their emotional problems. I don't know. It was just really disappointing. I liked seeing the characters again. I don't think the characters were really that different, but it was like the plot decisions. I was just kind of confused. Like, I ultimately felt like this was kind of trying to be like a character study, but then all of their decisions aren't based on like their character growth. They were based on if there was a plot happening outside of their character. So both were just unsatisfying. And like, I think Ava Reid's very talented at portraying their emotions in a compelling way. Like, that's what drew me through the book, like how they were experiencing and showing their emotional journeys, but then nothing ultimately happens. Like, we get more of an answer about the sexism Effie faces than we do anything about the war or the racism. So I don't know. And I'm just sad that it feels like all the reviews from the first book shitting on it they came to fruition here. Like, I don't know. A lot of people seem to think that Ava Reid is turning out too many books too fast and not like letting them percolate really. I might be agreeing here. I know. Which brings me to the next book, which is actually a novella for Study in Drowning called An Archive of Romance. So it is letters, poems, art, textbook excerpts, etc. from the world, from the first two books. So things that they've referenced, the like fairy tales that they're talking about, etc., compiled into like a scrapbook. And I loved that part, like seeing what they were actually referencing and like experiencing parts of the text, seeing the letters they wrote was super fun. I loved it. A lot of the excerpts as well, I thought if they had been integrated into the books would have been better. And then there's an epilogue, which it didn't contribute to the story. So, I mean, if you're a big fan of the series, I think it would be worth it to read this book, to like go through all the little pieces and stuff. But if you weren't a fan, I don't think it adds anything that would change your mind. Right? Okay, I've been really down on these last few books. However, this next book was absolutely amazing. So, The Everlasting by Alix E. Harrow. Mind-blowing. 5 stars immediately. I loved it. So good. Reads with Rachel put out a video a little bit ago comparing it to Infinite Baths by Sleep Token. And at first, while I was starting the book, I was like, no. But then by the end of the book, now every time I hear Infinite Baths, like I cry. So this story is described as a reluctant lady knight and a not so heroic historian fighting through time and space to rewrite their tragic fates. So the book has one main narrator, Owen Mallory. So he is a historian who has been obsessed with a folktale that has been kind of been propagandized in his country his entire life. The story of Una Everlasting, like the most famous knight in history. And he is given the opportunity to translate the like definitive historical document about Una Everlasting. However, he goes to translate the book, he opens it up and it's blank, and he basically falls through his pages to Una. Like he wakes up and there's Una, and he decides to accompany her on her final knightly conquest that like defines her legacy. This is an adult novel, so there are some themes and some stuff going on that, you know, definitely isn't PG-13. I laughed, I cried, I kicked my feet. Like I read this book in one go. I started it thinking, oh, I'll just read a little bit before bed, read through the night. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. There are just so many layers, and seeing like the emotional journey Owen takes as he gets to know Una as she actually was just, oh my God. There is a hilarious horse sidekick. He was so funny. I'm a huge sucker for animal sidekicks. He was probably my favorite part, if I'm being honest. The journey through this story is absolutely impeccable. I went in knowing zero other than it's about a knight and some dude, and I was blown away. It is, interestingly enough, written in second person. So it is as if Owen is writing a letter to someone about them. I think the last time I read a story written in second POV was the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, which is also an amazing book. I don't know if you're one of those like POV snobs, you might not like it, but I thought it added so much to the story. I highly recommend. I've been telling everybody I know that they need to go read this book once it comes out. It will be published October 28th of this year. So in a few weeks, totally worth it. I am honestly really tempted to buy a hard copy, which is shocking. You know, I've said before, I don't buy physical books really, but this one was just so good. So good. Which makes it that much sadder to talk about the final book that I read this month. It's the sequel to The Merciful Crow, The Faithless Hawk by Margaret Owen. I listened to this also in audiobook. It was fine. You know, so we're continuing off where the first book ends. So I don't really want to spoil anything, but we are still continuing the journey of Jasimir trying to secure the throne against his stepmother. I really enjoyed how much more intricate the plot of this book was than the first book. Since the first book was pretty straightforward, this one had a lot more going on. There were more descriptions, which I enjoyed. It gave a much more solid depiction of the world. Again, Phi's emotional arc, I still really liked. I think Margaret Owen is very good at having her characters express emotion without like bashing you over the head with it. Margaret Owen is also very good at making me gasp at all of the plot twists. And there were a lot more cats in this one, so that's a plus. However, the first 25% I kind of found boring. The main antagonist has a key weapon that I did not think made sense in the context of magic as it was established in the first book. And I was ultimately very confused by the ending. I understood conceptually as it was described, but for some reason I was just left really unsatisfied. So this is 2 for 1 on Margaret Owen series, leaving me feeling empty. I don't think anything was wrong with it. And I think for a YA, it's probably very good. But I think another one of my mistakes was listening to this straight after finishing The Everlasting, which just made this one even less interesting in comparison. If I'm being honest, I probably would have DNF'd this if it were standalone, but since it was a series, I felt like I had to finish it. As for other books I attempted to read in this month, I hear everyone talking about Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry on Book Talk. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so I downloaded it, started reading. I got like 5 pages in and immediately was like, no, I am absolutely not interested in this character at all. I'm looking at the Goodreads and somehow it's 654 pages. It just felt like that first chapter was just hitting you over the head with the character thinking things. She was just like, I have this feeling. Info dump, info dump, info dump. Yep, this is my other feeling. More info dump, info dump, info dump. Yeah, I immediately gave up. Kind of embarrassing. So I'm not rating it. It might have just been my frame of mind. Unfortunately, like I said I was planning to, I did not finish The Works of Vermin by Kieran Innes. It still is not published yet, so I have this month to read it. Well, that was everything I read in September. Have you read any of these books? What do you think about them? Let me know in the comments down below. But that is all for now. I will see you next time.